Welcome back to our discussion on race and prejudice against people from the northeastern part of India. With me here in the studio, I have Professor A.Bimol Akoijam from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Akoijam, you know, Indian society is deeply divided. There's no doubt about it. But let me play devil's advocate. It is said that what has happened is the way the government of India has looked at the states of the Northeast. It's essentially looked at it as a geographical entity, often ignoring the fact that it's one of the most diverse parts of the world in terms of the number of languages, the cultures, in terms of ethnicity. But it suits at least some people to look on it as not just a geographical entity, but as you yourself pointed out, a cultural entity. As you say, the Look East policy, the gateway to Southeast Asia, ignoring the fact that, you know, within the Northeast there are diversities, and how much of it, this kind of keeping the Northeast away from the so-called mainstream, is part of a bigger political, economic reality. And it's not just a little chicken's neck that divides West Bengal from Assam with Bangladesh in the middle. But this whole the strategic, the geopolitical, the economic factors. So the Northeast is dependent on the rest of India for various products, various services, and by pumping in money at one level, you have created an elite, a very corrupt elite within the Northeast. And you're also saying, okay, but we need our armed forces to be present there because they are protecting the borders. Yes.
You know, that's the irony. You know, sometimes I said it. I mean, look at your face. Do you think that with that kind of an eye, with that kind of a nose, you dream to become a sellable actor in the Indian film industry, as one of this person who involved in this film was saying in one of the interviews? You know, they want to give platforms of the northeastern people or artists in the Indian film industry, as if Hindi film industry is the Indian film industry. You know?
It's the biggest in the world.
No, I'm saying that there are other films.
Of course,
of Tamils and Bengalis and so on. But
yes, Marathi and Telugu and
when
Manipuri.
You say that's what do you mean by when you say Indian film? But that's besides the point. What I was trying to share is, as you pointed out, you know, it's something very tragically, comical at one level. It's as good as asking that we are giving you 90% of your budget, you should be grateful to us. You crib about your insurgents and your extortion, we are sending army and to protect you, and then we are giving laws so that the army can operate. Similarly, we
including the Armed Forces Special Powers
that's what I said.
And we know the other famous woman from Manipur.
Sharmila, okay.
Yes.
That was,
Sharmila.
In a very similar sense, they are saying that, don't think that your kind of a look will be acceptable in the rest of the country, but we need to tell your story. You should be grateful that, you are being played by some of the beautiful people of our mainland India. You should be more grateful, that kind of an attitude.
So that kind of patronizing attitude.
Absolutely. That's why on the three occasions, on the three examples, we don't agree with that.
What are these three examples?
No, the one I said it. If you have to say that, to protect you, we are sending army. Right. I mean, absolutely no country in the world uses army in this fashion.
Okay. Let me here move on a little bit. Well-known philosopher and academic Professor Mrinal Miri, at a recent lecture, after a lecture, he was asked by a German national who heads the Heinrich Böll Foundation in India, this is the Green Party of Germany, that the people of Northeast India face racial discrimination when they are in Delhi, in the national capital. To which point, Professor Miri was not sure whether you can call it a racial discrimination, because he says that, look, in what way are we different? Most people of the Northeast are multilingual. They speak more than one language, they speak 2 or 3 languages. Yet at the same time, he agreed there is discrimination, but he was reluctant to describe it as racial discrimination, which is based on the color of the skin. What are your views?
That's what I said. I gave you marital rape examples. The woman has to be, in psychotherapy, for example, when you meet this kind of a woman who go through this kind of a trouble, what psychologists often say is that we try to give a home by naming that experience with a word, then she can grapple with, so that she doesn't doubt herself or blame herself whether I am a bad wife because I'm feeling like this kind of a thing. So it is like that. You need to name it. But surprisingly, it is here very quickly. Article 15 of the Indian Constitution talks about against discrimination based on 5 categories: caste, religion, sex, place of birth, and mind you, race, which is in the second. For caste, you have casteism. For religion, you have communalism, you have sexism for sex, and regionalism for place of birth. Why is that in this country, whose founding fathers have included this expression called race in that article, refuses to acknowledge that we have a race issue in this country?
Why?
There are racism here.
And it's only when you find that here are Indians who are supposedly quote unquote brown skin, who act in a highly discriminatory manner against people from different countries of Africa who are students, say, in the national capital.
Absolutely, that's what I said. The Constitution and the founding fathers have already recognized that race is one of the basis, is one of the, if you might call it what sociologists call it, how the Indian society is stratified: caste, religion, regions, and is one of them is obviously race. That's why the founding fathers have included that word race in that article. Why is that Indian intellectuals in this country, why is that our intellectuals or the political class is refusing to talk about race and racism?
You're
in this
aware
country?
that in international fora, and
by the way, we also are signatory to the International Covenant on Racial Discrimination. It's strange.
And you are aware that there's been a huge issue and a huge controversy of whether caste discrimination should be equated or made, or considered to be no different from racial discrimination.
That's the government of India's position, and many of the leading scholars reject the fact that a caste is race. But we also know that there are a group of Dalit activists who believe that it should be incorporated into this, because there is also this word called descent. Because this caste is descent based now; it's not occupation based. So therefore, it should be there. But the typical answer, if you find it, is that this is a domestic affair. It should not be internationalized. And 2, that the society will be all the more fragmented. We are already troubled by this. It's as good as saying that domestic violence, घर की इज्जत के लिए चुपचाप रहना चाहिए, बाहर नहीं निकलना नहीं चाहिए, kind of a approach.
In chapter 1 of your history book is usually said, Indian history, unity in diversity. But this phenomenon of racism, it's not a uniquely Indian phenomenon. You know that, as I do. But is there something different? Is there something unique about racism, the way it manifests itself in India?
No, not much. Briefly, if I have to take one of the places in the world where racism is such a big, has a long history, United States. In 1970s, the attitude is what they call it impact based. Whether your intention is to hurt me or not based on race is not important, but the impact is important.
The use of the word nigger, negro, which actually means
you
black.
may not meant to insult you, but you're saying it. What this particular parameter says that impact basis. If the other feels bad,
so if Barack Obama used the word nigger with another African American, that's politically acceptable. But if not, if a white Caucasian says it.
No. I'm just trying to hint at certain things. Why we have this difficulty is this. But there, as in the 80s with the Republican and this Ronald Reagan and others, become a little conservative. So they turn to another paradigm called intention. But that is why modern sociologists in the United States, for example, or social psychologists talked about unconscious racism and implicit racism. You may not be conscious that your act is a racist act. It has become almost individual. So they have done experiment like sending, responding to the advertisement for a job, same profile, but changing the name with a black sounding name and a white sounding name. The chances of you getting a call is higher if you have a white name.
Or if you want to look at it differently, when you look at the composition of people who are, say, behind bars in the United States of America, you find a disproportionately higher proportion.
That's also one. The same thing with African Americans. TADA, would happen with this former legislation TADA.
Terrorism and
most of the people
Act.
detained underwear turns out to be minority Muslims. And similarly, that in America, most of the people who get arrested, if you are a black or Hispanic,
the chances of you getting arrested are higher.
Absolutely, tension is higher.
All right.
And in fact, you should also know that that's why, if you look at such a reports and others, the percentage of these people in the police force and institutional structures is what? In America, I just read an article which says 75% of the police are white.
Okay.
And that's why you have this recent Ferguson incident and people are
Correct.
talking about it.
So Professor A.Bimol Akoijam, I take the third break. It's a final break in our discussion. We have a short segment, which is the fourth segment. I want you to look ahead a little bit. At one level, popular culture, the very term popular culture means they want to make money, and they want to make money as quickly as possible. So they will cater to the lowest common denominator. They will reinforce stereotypes, and that way you sort of deepen the prejudices which are already latent in a highly divided, in a deeply divided society such as ours. How do we move forward? How do we change the way people think? How do we change attitudes? Is that easier said than done? Let's look at that aspect. I get back to you. We're looking at race, prejudice, and discrimination. In particular, racial and discrimination against and racial prejudice and discrimination against those who belong to the 7 states of northeastern India, as well as the 8th state, that is Sikkim. We are going to take a last break in our discussion, and we are going to look at what needs to be done. Can people change their attitudes, whether it be discriminating against those who come from Assam and Manipur and Nagaland and Tripura and Meghalaya and Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim? Or are these prejudices going to get more deeply entrenched with popular culture, with popular cinema reinforcing them? Stay with us. We'll be back. Welcome back to the fourth and the last segment of this conversation on race, prejudice and stereotyping of people from northeastern India. With me here in the studio of Lok Sabha Television, I have A.Bimol Akoijam. He's Associate Professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, a psychologist, filmmaker, theatre enthusiast. Professor Akoijam, when you look at the way Indian society is evolving and changing, yes, the neoliberal the neoliberal consumerist economy, the aspirations, and when you look at the deep-seated prejudices which continue, how do we change? How do we change the way people think? How do we try and remove or do away with those deep-seated, deep-rooted prejudices? I'm just Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, that he wants a world where the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes. You prick the finger of a person with fair skin and one with dark skin, the color of the blood is the same. But these prejudices, these stereotypes are so deeply entrenched. How do you move ahead? Yes, sir.
See, that's it. See, what I would have suggested, first to move ahead is to name, identify, and give a name. Don't make it a nameless phenomenon and make people confused. That doesn't enable us or the people who suffer to grapple with their experience. If there is casteism, we name it as casteism. If there is sexism, we name it.
So if there is racism, call it racism.
We name it and we deal with it. That's the way to move forward. And I would have loved this movie. Priyanka is one of the finest actors that we have in this country. I have no doubt about it. But there should have been a little more honest and said that this is inspired by Mary Kom.
And it's a work of fiction.
It's a work of fiction. Make it.
And it has only...
Make the money and you have the song, have anything,
And the
don't
dance.
claim that it is to be authentic. We are
And the
putting some
sex and the
actors from the
violence.
Northeast and it is the true representation of a struggle. Don't give me this kind of an explanation, because there are people in the Northeast and in the rest of the country as well who knows what is what called in the West whitewashing and race bending in Hollywood. Here what the difficulty is, since we don't recognize racism, if I have to coin a term like the Western white washing, we have brown washing, people will not be able to make sense of what am I saying.
Okay. You know, Professor, you deal with students. You've seen the kind of discrimination that, say a city like Delhi, it's supposed to be a cosmopolitan, national capital region. It's where people from all across the country, all the 29 states and the 7 union territories are supposed to be able to come, to study, to resign peacefully. It's supposed to be a place where people from all over the world can come. Yet you find this kind of stereotyping manifest itself in acts of violence, and not just acts of discrimination, acts of criminal acts of violence. So what needs to be done? I've always wondered, we can all be woolly-headed liberals and say, no, don't do this, don't do this. But how do you actually change attitudes at the level of the street?
Yeah, that's true. I think it is basically is what is can be, it's almost cliche now. It's education, educate the people. The tendency to, this has a deeper, the violence against the Northeast students or the youth here is also the same kind of exclusion. You put in anthropology. Anthropology is the study of primitive and tribal and simple society and so on, and history is for the civilized people. Hegel's people without history. India was an anthropological subject, not a historical subject. In a similar thing in this country, you make Northeastern people as an anthropological subject and then remove from the history. And from the democratic frame of governance, you remove them and put army.
That was precisely what Professor Mrinal Miri was also saying.
Absolutely. So
don't forget the history.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that these exclusions should be structurally addressed first. And second is educate the people. Otherwise, you think that all these Northeastern girls are, morally loose and so on and so forth.
They're promiscuous.
Absolutely. Mind you, that's all.
Only fit for
unfortunately, all the colonizers tend to look at the native women in that fashion to establish moral superiority of the colonizers. And this is very unfortunate.
And it goes beyond that. They come to Delhi, so they are good as waitresses in restaurants, in Chinese restaurants.
That's a very interesting thing what you have said it. If they are good for hospitality industry, why they cannot be good as an actor? That would be my question at one level. And I have said that these are prejudices about Northeastern girls. I've often said it. If the spaghettis and the tank tops and hot pants were only worn by Northeastern girls, all the boutiques in Delhi would have gone bankrupt long time back.
You're right.
This is something that is to be understood.
But to some extent, these kind of prejudices continue. And since we're on the topic of this prejudice about cinema, mothers don't want, or the fathers don't want their daughters to get into cinema because it's supposed to be, a quote unquote, a glorified brothel, if nothing else.
I think that thing has changed now.
That thing has changed a bit, has it not? Though every now and then it gets stereotyped. Recently, there was a child actress who she was arrested in Hyderabad, and it was interesting that she was named and her statement was highly publicized, but not the people who were physically exploiting.
So let's accept. We in India, we are not only diverse, we are also deeply prejudiced set of people. We are casteist at one level, we are racist at one level, we are sexist at one level. But as a democratic country, as a civilized group of people, we must be able to name and deal with it.
With a great constitution?
Absolutely, we should be able to name it and move ahead and deal with it. And don't try to confuse people with saying this or that, That's what I was a little disturbed. That's why I wrote that article.
And maybe you shall see the film too.
I'll see, definitely. I have no doubt. But I will not pay the money in the theatre to
Don't
see
go to the theatre and see the film. And maybe when you meet Mary Com the next time, you're in
I twice I met her on the way when we
yes, when you're in Imphal and when you meet Iram Sharmila, maybe you can also tell them about your views in this regard.
I would do that, definitely.
Well, thank you very much, Professor A.Bimol Akoijam, for coming here to the studio and expressing your thoughts so candidly And I hope that those who've heard you, those who've watched you, people would realize what discrimination is all about, and how deeply divisive and prejudiced and racist and casteist and sexist Indian society is, and how we need to change all our views, how we need to look deep within ourselves to change our own attitudes and our values. Thank you once again.
My pleasure.
And thank you very much for being with us on this program, where we looked at issues relating to stereotyping, prejudices, racism, with specific reference to the recent film on Mary Kom, and with general reference to the people who belong to the northeastern part of India. Thank you very much for being with us on this program.